"Hands up, ma'am. Step out of the car." The words pierced the cold night air, echoing off the brick buildings lining the deserted street in downtown Charleston. Rain-slicked asphalt reflected the glow of the streetlights, fractured into long streaks of amber and silver as the tires of the unmarked police cruiser hissed through shallow puddles. Monique Carter's hands hovered briefly above the steering wheel, calm but deliberate, as she exhaled slowly, letting the chill wash over her. Her eyes scanned the interior of the car, noting the dashboard lights flickering, the smell of wet leather mixing with the faint scent of rain and ozone. She adjusted the hood of her navy blue jacket over her tightly braided hair, her movements precise, unhurried, betraying none of the tension that hung between her and the two uniformed officers standing at the driver's side window. Detective John Harper's expression was unreadable, a mask of authority polished by years of assuming control, while Officer Mark Stevens' smirk barely concealed the condescension in his voice as he repeated, "We need to talk. Step out of the vehicle." The rain intensified, tapping a rhythmic pattern against the car's roof, creating a soundtrack of tension that seemed to slow time itself. Monique's gaze drifted briefly to the rearview mirror, catching her own reflection, sharp cheekbones, steady eyes, a calm that contrasted with the storm outside. She unlocked the seatbelt, the click of the latch loud against the soft hum of the rain, and opened the door, letting the water splash against her boots, soaking her denim jeans in slow, cold streaks. The officers watched her carefully, their hands hovering near their belts, the faint glint of their badges catching the streetlights in quick flashes. The wind whipped across the street, tugging at her jacket, bending the umbrella of a nearby pedestrian market, and carrying the distant wail of a siren. Monique stepped onto the wet pavement, boots squelching softly, her posture straight, unwavering. Detective Harper took a step closer, his polished shoes slick against the puddles, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face. "We have reason to believe you. We're involved in the incident at the warehouse," he said, voice measured, authoritative, but tinged with disbelief as if he could not reconcile her composed demeanor with the accusation. Monique tilted her head slightly, her gaze meeting his evenly, registering the subtle flicker of doubt in his otherwise confident eyes. Around them, the street was empty, save for the occasional glow of a passing traffic light, the puddles reflecting distorted images of the officers' figures, long and almost menacing. She exhaled again, slow and steady, and said, "I think you're making a mistake." The words were calm, soft, but resonated with a firmness that belied her quiet voice, and the rain seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, falling in suspended droplets off the edge of her jacket. Harper's eyes narrowed, the rain streaking across his hat, his jaw tightening imperceptibly as Stevens shifted his weight, scanning the perimeter with cautious attention. The tension stretched between them, taut as the streetlight wires above, vibrating ever so slightly in the wind. Monique shifted her stance subtly, her boots pressing into the wet asphalt, feeling the slight give, noting the scent of wet concrete and distant gasoline. Her fingers flexed naturally, the calm in her movements masking years of disciplined training and focus that ran deeper than the casual observer could imagine. The officers' voices broke the heavy silence intermittently, low mutters to each other, eyes darting as they tried to anticipate her next move. Monique's mind, however, was serene, cataloging every detail. The slick curb, the angle of the cruiser, the reflection of the nearest street lamp in the puddle near her right foot, the subtle shift of Harper's weight as he adjusted his grip on his notebook. The night seemed to stretch, droplets of rain glimmering like tiny prisms in the streetlights, as though the city itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Monique's lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders squared, the sound of distant traffic muffled by the pounding rain and the quiet storm of anticipation that hung heavy in the air. The officers took a cautious step forward, their hands brushing against their belts again, but Monique did not flinch, did not step back, her eyes calm, calculating, piercing through the glimmering sheets of rain that swept across the asphalt. Every element of the street, the wet bricks, the puddles, the distant neon signs, the faint hum of electricity overhead, amplified the tension, creating a cinematic frame that captured her unassuming yet indomitable presence. She exhaled slowly, letting the cold moisture coat her lungs, feeling the rhythm of the rain sync with the quickening beat of anticipation. Detective Harper cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We need to take you in for questioning." Monique tilted her chin slightly, unwavering, and replied with measured calm, "I assure you, I've done nothing wrong." The words hung in the air like a suspended promise, carried in the interplay of rain, reflective light, and quiet authority emanating from a woman who, at that moment, seemed ordinary to anyone watching. But beneath that calm surface lay skills and discipline honed through years of rigorous training, invisible to the casual eye. The rain continued to fall, soft at first, then in heavier sheets, drumming on the car, the pavement, the metal of the cruiser, creating a symphony of tension and anticipation that mirrored the silent standoff, each second stretching longer, laden with the potential for revelation, as Monique Carter stood tall and resolute, her eyes never leaving the detective. The storm of the night framing the quiet intensity of a woman whose ordinary appearance belied an extraordinary hidden identity. Monique Carter walked away from the unmarked cruiser, her boots squelching against the soaked pavement, the cold rain seeping through the fabric of her jeans and jacket, each step purposeful, measured, as if she were tracing the rhythm of her own thoughts in tandem with the city around her. The night carried a damp chill that crept into her bones, but her mind remained steady, alert to every flicker of light, every echo of movement in the otherwise quiet streets. Street lamps reflected on the wet asphalt in fractured, distorted lines that seemed to stretch infinitely, mirroring the precision and discipline ingrained in her from years of intensive training. She crossed the narrow intersection, noting the distant hum of a delivery truck navigating the empty lanes, the faint hiss of tires on slick concrete, the low murmur of a late-night cafe somewhere blocks away. In her pocket, her hands felt the smooth contour of the car key she had retrieved moments ago, the leather of her gloves damp from the rain, yet she flexed her fingers subtly, as though to remind herself of the control she always maintained. Monique's eyes drifted momentarily to the high-rise buildings surrounding the street, their glass facades catching the dim glow of the streetlights, reflecting back a fragmented image of the city that was at once familiar and alien. She inhaled deeply, the cool, wet air filling her lungs, carrying the scent of ozone, rain-soaked concrete, and a hint of pine from the few trees lining the sidewalk. Her thoughts shifted, cataloging the details she had noticed in the earlier encounter. The angle of the cruiser, the glint of Detective Harper's badge, the way Officer Stevens shifted his weight, subtle but telling movements that spoke volumes about human behavior under pressure. As she approached the corner, a faint neon sign flickered, casting intermittent pulses of pink and blue across the puddles at her feet, creating a rhythm that synchronized almost naturally with the measured cadence of her steps. Monique's mind replayed fragments of the day, each detail stored meticulously. The pattern of shadows across the office floor where she worked, the slight bend in a file folder that hinted at its contents, the quiet hum of the city that masked conversations she had overheard while moving between buildings. She stepped under a narrow awning for a moment, letting the rain wash over her hood, the water dripping steadily off the edge, merging with the puddles below. Her reflection in the shallow water mirrored a composed, determined figure, a stark contrast to the anxious expressions she had observed on the officers moments before. The hum of the city continued, a low, steady undercurrent, punctuated by the occasional splash of a distant car passing over a wet street, a muted honk from somewhere far down the block, the faint click of heels on concrete. Monique's thoughts drifted briefly to the people she had encountered in her daily life, colleagues and neighbors unaware of the discipline and skill she carried beneath the calm exterior, each unaware of the quiet strength that had been honed through rigorous training and countless hours of mental and physical preparation. As she turned the corner, she noted the faint sound of dripping water from a fire escape above, the subtle rustle of leaves carried by a mild wind that twisted through the street, the soft patter of rain on metal trash bins, creating a gentle, irregular percussion that seemed to underscore the cadence of her movements. Her focus remained sharp, attuned to both her environment and the rhythm of her own heartbeat, a steady pulse that maintained clarity amidst the damp night. Monique's eyes scanned the alleys and doorways, taking note of potential obstacles, escape routes, subtle variations in light and shadow, the slight tilt of a lamppost reflecting off a puddle, the texture of the asphalt beneath her boots, the uneven brick of the sidewalks, all cataloged instinctively, each detail part of a vast mental map she carried with her. She passed an empty bus stop, the bench soaked, the glass panels streaked with rain, reflecting her image in fragmented, vertical lines. A single pedestrian hurried past, umbrella tilted against the wind, footsteps splashing in rhythm with the droplets cascading from the nearby rooftops. Monique adjusted the strap of her messenger bag, its weight distributed evenly, feeling the reassuring balance it provided, the tactile familiarity grounding her in the present moment. Her mind wandered momentarily to her training exercises, the meticulous drills that emphasized awareness, control, patience, and observation, all practiced in environments far more demanding than this urban landscape. Each step she took now echoed lessons internalized over years, her senses heightened, yet tempered by the calm restraint that allowed her to move seamlessly through a world unaware of the depth of her abilities. The glow from a distant streetlight caught her eye, a narrow cylinder of light illuminating a patch of wet asphalt, puddles within it reflecting the faint flicker of nearby neon. She paused for a breath, exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of the rain and her steps synchronize, the city around her alive with subtle details, each one cataloged, analyzed, filed away. The wind shifted, carrying the faint aroma of roasted coffee from a late-night cafe, the distant hum of an idling engine, the soft rustle of plastic from a nearby trash can caught in the breeze. Monique's posture remained composed, confident, yet unassuming, her movements precise and deliberate, a study in controlled observation. She reached the intersection where the next street opened into a quieter residential lane, the streetlight above casting long, wet shadows, illuminating the glint of her boots against the slick asphalt. Her eyes scanned the environment with an instinctual awareness, noting the slight movements of a stray cat slipping across a driveway, the faint creak of a gate swinging in the wind, the gentle ripple of water from a puddle disturbed by a distant footstep. Monique continued forward, boots pressing into the wet concrete with deliberate intent, the rhythmic patter of the rain accompanying her every step, her mind cataloging every detail, preparing, anticipating, fully aware that beneath the quiet exterior, she carried discipline, observation, and resilience forged through years of rigorous preparation. Monique Carter approached the entrance to the municipal building, its glass doors reflecting the flickering amber glow of the streetlights, rain dripping steadily from the metal awning overhead, forming a rhythm that matched the steady cadence of her own breathing. She paused for a brief moment, adjusting the strap of her messenger bag, her eyes scanning the polished marble steps that led to the main lobby. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens were now a block behind, their figures visible through the rain, dark silhouettes moving with purpose yet slowed by the slick streets. The building loomed ahead, modern yet imposing, a mixture of concrete, glass, and steel, reflecting both the ambient city light and the intermittent flashes of neon signs from across the street. As Monique entered, the interior greeted her with the clean, sterile scent of polished stone and the faint hum of fluorescent lighting. The floor tiles were slick from the rain carried in on her boots, small puddles forming underfoot, each step she took creating a muted, deliberate echo that reverberated through the spacious atrium. She moved with controlled precision, eyes flicking to the security camera above the entrance, noting its angle and the faint reflection of her own silhouette against the shiny surface. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor and neatly styled hair, looked up from her monitor, her expression neutral but attentive as Monique passed by, her heels clicking softly against the tile. The lobby was nearly empty at this late hour, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional distant footstep of maintenance staff moving through the upper corridors. Monique's gaze swept across the interior, noting the layout, the arrangement of offices and hallways, the subtle variations in light as it bounced off the metallic and glass surfaces, the faint shadow patterns shifting with the overhead fluorescent tubes. She paused at the base of a short staircase leading to a mezzanine, letting her eyes trace the lines of the building, cataloging escape routes and vantage points, her mind a silent map of spatial awareness. Her breathing remained steady, unhurried, each exhale mingling with the damp, cool air, carrying with it the faint scent of wet concrete from outside that lingered in the vestibule. The subtle sound of a ticking clock from the far wall punctuated the quiet, each tick synchronized with the rhythm of her steps as she moved forward. Detective Harper entered the lobby moments later, his polished shoes clicking against the wet tiles, water dripping from his coat sleeves, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his face. While Stevens followed closely, his gaze constantly scanning the room, eyes narrowing at the calculated composure of Monique. She ascended the steps to the mezzanine slowly, deliberately, allowing the light to catch the contours of her jacket, the damp strands of hair clinging to her forehead, yet her posture remained upright and composed. As she reached the top, a large window framed a view of the empty street below, puddles reflecting the scattered city lights, while the rain continued its steady percussion against the glass. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors that led to offices and conference rooms, each closed and silent, a faint metallic scent of doorknobs and polished handles underlining the quiet tension. Monique's hand brushed lightly against the railing as she moved, feeling the cool steel under her fingers, registering the slight vibrations from distant machinery in the building. Each subtle cue added to her mental map. The lighting overhead flickered once, casting alternating shadows across her path, and she adjusted her steps in perfect harmony with the shifting light, aware of every angle and every sound. She paused at a corner, peering down a long corridor toward the offices at the far end, her eyes catching the reflection of her own movements in the polished surface of a metal door. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the distant patter of rain still falling outside, creating an ambient rhythm that mirrored the calculated control she maintained in her own body. Monique's senses were attuned, cataloging the faint creak of a floorboard from an office further down, the slight vibration of a door latch as a gentle breeze moved through a window vent, the soft echo of water droplets from a leaky pipe above. She adjusted the weight of her bag slightly on her shoulder, feeling the familiar distribution of its contents, a reassuring balance that allowed her to move with fluidity and purpose. Her eyes traced the details of the walls, the textures of paint and panels, the subtle imperfections and variations that would go unnoticed by a casual observer, yet each element contributed to her mental map of the space. As she approached the end of the corridor, a security panel blinked softly in red, and she noted its location, the angle of its sensors, the faint hum of electronics, all cataloged without conscious effort. The faint scent of damp stone, mixed with the aroma of polished wood from an office nearby, creating a layered environment that Monique absorbed completely, every sensory detail adding to her situational awareness. The hallway stretched onward, empty, quiet, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound of movement from maintenance staff above, their presence muted by distance. Monique slowed her pace briefly, inhaling the cool, damp air deeply, exhaling in rhythm with the gentle patter of rain still visible through the large windows at the end of the hall, the reflections of city lights distorted by droplets on the glass. Her mind cataloged everything: the lines of the ceiling, the placement of lights, the reflective surfaces, the faint hum of HVAC systems, the texture of carpeting underfoot, the slight tilt of a door frame. Each element a part of the complex puzzle of the space she now navigated with quiet precision. Detective Harper and Stevens reached the lobby below, pausing momentarily to scan the mezzanine, their expressions revealing a mixture of caution and lingering disbelief at the controlled composure of Monique Carter as she moved through the building with deliberate, unassuming authority, the rain and night outside framing her movements in a cinematic interplay of light, shadow, and atmosphere, every step measured, every glance calculated, the quiet rhythm of her presence dominating the scene. Without a single word spoken, Monique Carter reached the end of the corridor and paused, letting her gaze sweep across the network of offices ahead, the soft fluorescent light reflecting off polished metal and glass surfaces, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the lightly carpeted floor. She took a deliberate step forward, her polished leather boots pressing softly into the textured carpet, the faint click resonating through the quiet hallway. Each movement was measured, intentional, her mind cataloging every angle, every reflective surface, every potential point of observation, as if the building itself were a living entity that she needed to navigate with precision. The scent of polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of rain carried from the streets below, the humid air, thick enough to make each breath deliberate yet calming. Monique's fingers brushed lightly against the cool steel of a doorframe as she moved past, noting the subtle vibration that indicated a nearby ventilation duct and the faint echo of distant footsteps from the maintenance staff above. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens were not far behind, their muted voices carrying occasionally through the lobby below, giving away their proximity as they communicated in hushed tones, unaware of the silent confidence that Monique maintained. She paused at a junction where the hallway split, the glow from overhead lights reflected in the windows on either side, creating a soft, luminescent guide that she followed instinctively, the rain outside casting moving patterns of light across the interior walls. Monique's gaze caught a faint shimmer on a polished plaque near the elevator, the reflection momentarily catching the contours of her face and the determined calm in her eyes. She adjusted the strap of her bag slightly, the weight even and reassuring, the soft rustle of fabric barely audible over the subtle hum of the building's climate system. The quiet ticking of a distant wall clock punctuated the gentle ambient noise, a steady rhythm that aligned with the measured pace of her steps. As she moved, her ears detected the slight hiss of an air vent above, the gentle vibration through the floor under her boots, the subtle shift of light from overhead fluorescents flickering intermittently, all cataloged instinctively in her mind. She rounded a corner to find the entrance to the main office, the double doors framed in brushed steel, the glass reflecting both her image and the soft light spilling from the hallway. Monique paused, her hand hovering near the door handle, feeling the cool metal under her fingertips, noting the faint warmth radiating from the internal temperature-controlled environment. The faint murmur of electronic equipment from within added another layer of ambient sound that she absorbed fully, the subtle variations in pitch and volume indicating the functioning of devices beyond the closed doors. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool air, a small wisp that mirrored the mist of the rain outside. As she adjusted her posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted, moving with an elegance that was entirely natural yet deliberate. The reflective glass of the doors captured her focused expression, a silent projection of calm authority and observation, as she calculated each step and angle, ready for whatever she would encounter beyond the threshold. From the lobby below, the faint shuffle of Harper and Stevens moving closer created a low, intermittent cadence, punctuated by the occasional sound of water dripping from a roof vent or the soft rustle of loose papers fluttering from a nearby office. Monique shifted her weight subtly, aligning her body in a stance of poised readiness, eyes scanning the mirrored surfaces and polished panels, noting every reflection and shadow, every potential point of observation or interaction. The light from the hallway pooled around her, diffusing through the glass, creating a subtle halo effect that highlighted the controlled grace of her movements, the quiet intensity in her focus. As she prepared to enter the office, her mind ran through the details once more, the layout of desks, the position of chairs, the potential visibility lines from nearby windows, the height and angle of cabinets, the subtle acoustics of the space, all cataloged silently, ready to be utilized in real time. Monique's steps toward the doors were deliberate, each one measured and precise, the soft echo resonating across the quiet hall, a signal of composure and readiness, her awareness absolute, the city night outside continuing its muted symphony of rain, reflections, and distant lights, framing her passage through the building with a cinematic, measured tension that spoke volumes without a single word being uttered. As Monique Carter reached the threshold of the main office, the soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the room, mingling with the faint patter of rain against the tall windows behind her. The air carried the scent of polished wood and freshly printed paper, a quiet contrast to the damp, metallic tang from the city streets outside. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens were close behind, their footsteps light but deliberate on the smooth floor, a measured cadence that seemed almost synchronized with the distant ticking of a wall clock. The interior space was orderly, every desk and chair aligned precisely, every surface reflecting the subdued glow of overhead lighting. The large windows stretching from floor to ceiling providing a partial view of the rain-soaked street below. Monique's eyes swept the room, taking in the arrangement of furniture, the subtle shadows cast by overhead lights, and the glimmer of polished metal fixtures. Her hands moved lightly to adjust the strap of her bag, feeling the reassuring weight and balance that allowed her to move with controlled confidence. The officers exchanged quiet words, their tone cautious, a slight edge of uncertainty creeping into their measured cadence as they observed Monique's composed demeanor. Each footstep she took was deliberate, her boots pressing against the lightly carpeted floor with a soft, precise echo, the gentle sound absorbed by the vastness of the lobby. She paused momentarily near the center of the room, letting her gaze linger on the polished surface of a conference table, noting the subtle reflections of the overhead lights and the muted colors of office chairs arranged neatly around it. The faint hum of electronics and ventilation created an ambient layer of sound, blending with the muted roar of rain beyond the windows. Monique inhaled slowly, letting the cool air fill her lungs, each breath measured and calm, grounding her in the present while her mind cataloged every visual and auditory detail. Her focus extended to the slightest movements, the tilt of a nearby door slightly ajar, the faint vibration of a distant printer, the gentle rustle of papers on an adjacent desk. Detective Harper's eyes flicked briefly toward Monique, registering her calm, precise movements, a subtle furrow forming in his brow as he attempted to reconcile her composed presence with the circumstances that had led them here. Officer Stevens adjusted his stance, eyes narrowing, scanning for any indication that Monique might act impulsively, unaware that beneath her serene exterior lay years of discipline and situational awareness honed through demanding training. Monique continued forward, her posture impeccable, her steps synchronized with the ambient sounds, each movement deliberate and unhurried. As she positioned herself near the central workspace, her presence commanding the space without overt assertion. The reflective surfaces of desktops and glass panels caught the soft overhead light, scattering subtle glimmers across the floor, further emphasizing the methodical precision in her observation. Her eyes caught the angle of the nearest window frame, the subtle pattern of condensation trailing downward, the faint distortion of reflections hinting at spatial depth, all analyzed instinctively. She paused at a corner of the room, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of a polished counter, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingertips, taking note of the slight vibration from the air conditioning unit above and the soft echo of her own movement in the expansive room. The officers advanced cautiously, their own steps measured and precise, the earlier confidence tempered by Monique's quiet control and the subtle authority in her gaze. The ambient sounds of the building, the low hum of lights, the gentle whoosh of airflow, the distant rumble of a service elevator, created a layered backdrop that she navigated with effortless awareness. Each reflection, shadow, and sound was cataloged silently, contributing to an internal map of the space that guided her movements with fluid grace. Monique exhaled slowly, her breath forming a faint wisp in the slightly cooler air near the windows, her gaze steady on the far end of the office where a row of closed doors awaited. She adjusted the weight of her bag, grounding herself, the soft swish of fabric audible only to her, a tactile reminder of control. Her steps resumed, deliberate and synchronized with the ambient rhythm of the space, advancing toward a central position that allowed her unobstructed observation of both the entrances and the expansive floor beyond. The reflective surfaces mirrored her careful movements, the polished wood and glass amplifying the ambient light, creating subtle highlights on the contours of her jacket and hair. Detective Harper's posture tightened slightly, the edge of his hat casting a shadow across his face as he observed Monique's measured pace, the faint drip of water from her rain-dampened jacket creating a soft, intermittent percussion against the tile below. Officer Stevens followed closely, a subtle tension in his shoulders, each shift of his weight absorbed and noted by Monique's keen perception. She paused just before the center of the office, a deliberate halt, letting the quiet and the ambient details merge into a tableau of controlled presence. Her breathing remained calm, even, and deep, as her mind processed the layout, the lighting, the reflective surfaces, and the subtle movements of the officers behind her. Each visual cue, every sound, and every reflection was cataloged instinctively, contributing to a complete mental map that allowed her to anticipate the officers' movements while maintaining a composed exterior. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, droplets sliding down the tall glass windows, mingling with the muted city lights to create shifting patterns of luminescence across the polished floor. Monique stood poised, every muscle relaxed yet ready, her gaze scanning the space, her presence commanding the attention of the room, not through force but through deliberate, understated authority, the quiet tension between her and the approaching officers forming an almost tangible layer in the ambient atmosphere of the office. Monique Carter stood perfectly still in the center of the office, the ambient hum of the fluorescent lights blending with the distant patter of rain on the windows to create a soft, almost meditative rhythm that filled the space. Her chest rose and fell steadily, each breath measured and deliberate, a quiet anchor in the tension-saturated room. The polished floor beneath her boots reflected the scattered light, casting subtle shadows that danced along the walls with each flicker of illumination. Her eyes, sharp and observant, swept across the desks and chairs arranged neatly around the conference table, registering every reflective surface, every slight movement, every detail that could convey information about the room and those who moved within it. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens lingered near the entrance, their postures stiff, shoulders tense, their eyes darting subtly, reading Monique's calm composure with a mixture of caution and growing unease. The faint scent of polished wood, paper, and the lingering dampness from the rain outside created a sensory tapestry that Monique absorbed completely, her awareness extending to the slightest changes in temperature or the softest vibration from the ventilation system above. She shifted her weight gently, one boot sliding slightly on the carpet, and the sound registered to her as a muted click, cataloged as part of her internal map. The officer's muted whispers carried faintly across the room, fragmented, cautious, and Monique processed them in real time, their subtext clear through the cadence and tone of their voices. Her hand brushed lightly against the edge of a desk, the cool, smooth surface a tactile cue, and her other hand adjusted the strap of her bag, a subtle movement that provided balance and readiness. The light from the tall windows continued to shimmer on the wet asphalt outside, casting intermittent patterns of gold and gray across the interior, highlighting the contours of her jacket and the determined set of her shoulders. Monique's gaze shifted subtly to a framed certificate on a wall near the far corner, the glass catching the fluorescent glow, the reflections dancing softly across the polished floor, each minor detail recorded with meticulous precision. The ambient noise of the city beyond the windows, a distant siren, the hum of traffic, the occasional hiss of tires on wet streets, layered with the interior sounds to create a rich environment of cues that Monique interpreted seamlessly. She exhaled slowly, the rhythm of her breath syncing with the subtle pulse of the room, her heartbeat steady, controlled, a quiet counterpoint to the low-level tension surrounding her. The officers moved slightly, stepping closer, and she noted each movement without flinching, the small shift of weight, the glint of a badge in the overhead light, the subtle curl of a hand as it approached a belt clip. Monique's eyes flicked briefly to the office doors ahead, closed and opaque, and then to the reflective surfaces around her, each mirror of glass and polished metal revealing angles and perspectives that she mentally cataloged in the intricate map of the space she maintained. The room itself seemed to hold its breath with her, the fluorescent lights casting a soft, diffuse glow, the shadows elongated across the floor, creating visual markers that punctuated her movements. Her mind ran through possibilities and contingencies, analyzing the angles of approach, the acoustic properties of the room, the patterns of light and shadow, all while maintaining the outward appearance of serene composure. She shifted her stance subtly, flexing her fingers inside the gloves she wore, feeling the weight of her bag as a grounding cue, a constant reminder of readiness and control. The sound of water dripping from the rain outside, faintly echoing off the windows and floor, created an irregular percussion, a rhythm that Monique integrated into her situational awareness, each drop a cue in the larger tapestry of environmental information. Her posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted, every micro-movement intentional, a silent signal of authority that was neither loud nor aggressive but undeniably present. The officer's cautious advances were met with calm observation, her gaze never leaving the space around her, cataloging every reflection, every shadow, every movement as potential information. The room seemed to contract around her stillness, the ambient light highlighting the precision of her posture, the subtle tension in her limbs, and the effortless grace of someone fully aware of her environment, yet choosing deliberate restraint. Monique exhaled again, her breath forming a small visible wisp in the slightly cooler air near the windows, and the sound, combined with the muted hum of ventilation and faint rain outside, created a layered auditory landscape that underscored her controlled presence. Every glance, every adjustment of posture, every calculated step forward was measured, deliberate, and integrated seamlessly into her awareness of the space, creating an almost palpable stillness in which her quiet strength and focused attention dominated the room without a single word being spoken. Monique Carter's eyes shifted slightly as the faint gleam of a polished badge on Detective John Harper's belt caught the light, a reflection that seemed to slow time, stretching the moment into an almost surreal clarity. The air in the office seemed heavier, dense with anticipation, the low hum of fluorescent lights and distant rainfall blending into a soft symphony of stillness. Monique's mind cataloged every detail, the subtle twitch of Harper's jaw, the slight furrow in his brow, the barely perceptible shift in Officer Stevens' stance, all signaling a growing awareness of something unspoken. She adjusted the strap of her bag and exhaled slowly, the motion deliberate, almost ceremonial, a quiet assertion of control over the room and the situation. As her gaze met Harper's directly, there was a pause, a fraction of a second stretched like an eternity, in which the faint recognition in his eyes began to surface, a flicker of comprehension and surprise. The polished surfaces around them, the reflective panels, and the soft glow of overhead lights highlighted the sudden change in the room's atmosphere, the tension transforming into a silent acknowledgement of Monique's hidden depth. Without a word, the room seemed to shift subtly, the spatial dynamics adjusting to her presence, her poised composure commanding the space in a way that transcended the ordinary interactions of authority and compliance. Harper's hand hovered briefly near his notepad, a subtle hesitation betraying the realization that the assumptions he had relied upon were incomplete, that the quiet figure before him held capabilities beyond what he had imagined. Monique's subtle, measured movements, the slight lift of a shoulder, the deliberate placement of her feet, the controlled exhalation, all conveyed a strength that was both contained and undeniable. The reflective glass of the office windows mirrored the shifting ambient light, capturing fragments of the realization forming in Harper's eyes and Stevens' quiet, taut posture, the silent understanding rippling through their awareness. Monique's breathing remained steady, controlled, the soft rhythm in harmony with the faint hum of electronics, the gentle drumming of rain outside, and the subtle vibrations of the building itself, all elements converging into a cinematic tableau that emphasized the quiet yet potent revelation. The officers took a cautious step forward, their movements deliberate but restrained, the previous confidence tempered by the recognition that the person they had underestimated carried a presence and an authority that was entirely unexpected. Monique's eyes tracked their motion without flinching, her composure unwavering, her mind a detailed map of their potential responses, each nuanced movement cataloged and integrated into her awareness. The light continued to shift subtly across the room, highlighting contours of furniture, reflections of her form, and the faint glimmer of badges and polished surfaces, enhancing the visual impression of a revelation that had taken place without a single word. Harper's voice, quiet and measured, broke the silence finally, carrying with it a note of restrained acknowledgement, an unspoken admission that the assumptions he had held were incomplete. Monique's subtle nod, the slight tilt of her head, and the calm steadiness of her posture conveyed understanding without the need for verbal assertion, the room absorbing her silent authority and registering the reversal of perceived power. The distant sound of rain continued to punctuate the ambient quiet, droplets sliding down the tall glass windows, creating shifting patterns of light that danced across the floor and walls, further dramatizing the moment of recognition. Monique's presence remained centered, her awareness encompassing the space, the officers, the reflective surfaces, and the ambient sounds, each detail reinforcing the shift in dynamics that had occurred. Harper's posture softened imperceptibly, the furrow of his brow easing as the realization fully dawned, while Stevens adjusted his stance, the subtle change in their body language a silent acknowledgement of Monique's unanticipated authority and skill. The room, the lighting, and the ambient sounds combined with the measured control in Monique's movements to create a cinematic impression of a revelation that had transformed the relational dynamics without a single overt statement. The tension that had dominated the room began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet respect, the officer's careful observation of her composure now framed as recognition of capability rather than confrontation. Monique exhaled one final, measured breath, the rhythm of her chest steady, and the room held the silent acknowledgement of a power that had been underestimated, the ambient light capturing the subtle transformation of awareness in Harper and Stevens as the quiet moment of revelation lingered, leaving an impression of restrained authority and unspoken understanding that reshaped the space entirely. Monique Carter finally exhaled a long, controlled breath, the quiet tension that had filled the office hours before dissolving into a serene clarity, as if the very air acknowledged the shift in perception around her. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens stood slightly apart, their earlier certainty replaced with a subtle, almost imperceptible humility. The rigid lines of authority softened as they absorbed the realization that the woman before them held a depth of capability and experience far beyond what they had assumed. Monique's gaze swept the room, taking in the polished floors, the reflective surfaces of glass and metal, and the ambient glow from the tall windows overlooking the rain-soaked streets, each element contributing to the calm, controlled atmosphere she now embodied. She adjusted the strap of her bag once more, the simple movement reinforcing her composed posture, the steady rhythm of her breathing syncing with the faint hum of the ventilation system above and the distant patter of rain, creating a quiet cadence that seemed to harmonize with the room itself. Harper's eyes met hers again, the flicker of recognition still present, tempered now with the first hint of respect, a silent acknowledgement that her composure, precision, and insight were qualities to be reckoned with rather than dismissed. Stevens shifted subtly, a small nod acknowledging her presence, and the unspoken understanding that the dynamic had irrevocably changed, the room itself seeming to hold space for the reversal that had occurred. Monique's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, imperceptible yet reflective of the quiet strength she had maintained through every observation, every step, every careful breath since entering the building. Her posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, exuding an authority derived not from volume or aggression, but from mastery of self and situation. The ambient light shifted slightly as clouds passed over the city lights outside, casting changing reflections across the polished surfaces of desks and panels, highlighting the subtle gestures of Harper and Stevens as they continued to process the realization before them. Monique's awareness remained acute, her senses cataloging the soft sound of rain droplets sliding down the windows, the distant hum of traffic muffled by the thickness of glass, the faint flicker of fluorescent lights overhead, and the minor vibrations in the floor beneath her boots. Each detail reinforced the controlled environment she maintained, her movements deliberate and fluid, a seamless integration of observation, intuition, and calm authority. Harper shifted his weight, the previous rigidity giving way to a slow, measured relaxation, the tension in his shoulders easing as he finally acknowledged, without words, the presence of skill and knowledge that had been hidden beneath Monique's quiet exterior. Stevens mirrored the subtle change, adjusting his stance, his gaze less probing and more observant, a tacit recognition of the strength and composure that had altered the dynamic in the room. Monique allowed a moment of stillness, the pause deliberate, letting the ambient sounds, the ventilation, the rain, the faint echoes of the building's interior, fill the space as a backdrop to the silent reconciliation of perception. Her hand rested lightly on her bag strap, grounding herself, the texture of the fabric a constant tactile cue, the motion unhurried, reinforcing the calm that had defined her presence since the first step into the office. Light reflected off the polished metal of door handles, glass partitions, and desk surfaces, glimmering across the room in irregular patterns that enhanced the visual rhythm of the quiet scene, each reflection captured instinctively by Monique's trained observation. The ambient temperature and faint scent of polished wood and paper contributed to the overall awareness she maintained, each sensory input cataloged and integrated into a mental map of the space and the evolving dynamic between herself and the two officers. Monique's gaze softened slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting in a controlled, minimal expression of satisfaction, not pride but the quiet acknowledgement of order restored and authority recognized. Harper finally stepped back slightly, a subtle shift that created room for dialogue and comprehension. His shoulders no longer tense, his posture relaxed but attentive, the unspoken communication of respect clear in his measured movements. Stevens followed, his eyes meeting Monique's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of her skill, insight, and the composure that had guided her every action. The room remained bathed in the ambient glow of the overhead lights and the reflected city lights, the rain continuing its gentle percussion against the windows, creating a calm, reflective rhythm that underscored the new equilibrium. Monique exhaled again, her body language relaxed yet fully aware, her posture a demonstration of the quiet authority earned through discipline, observation, and mastery of self, her presence now filling the room with a sense of order, respect, and an unmistakable integrity that transcended the previous tension, leaving the officers and the space itself aligned with the new understanding that had quietly, powerfully taken hold. Monique Carter stepped slowly toward the exit, her movements deliberate, graceful, and imbued with a quiet authority that seemed to settle over the office like a gentle tide, smoothing the residual tension and leaving a calm resonance in its wake. The polished floors reflected the soft ambient light from the ceiling, scattering it into faint, elongated patterns that trailed her as she walked, while the tall windows behind her captured the diffused glow of the rain-soaked city streets, each droplet tracing a path downward like slow, silvery threads. Detective John Harper and Officer Mark Stevens remained stationary, their postures relaxed yet attentive, subtle nods and measured glances acknowledging the shift that had occurred, a silent understanding that authority had been redefined not through force or volume, but through calm, precise presence. Monique adjusted the strap of her bag, the tactile movement grounding her as she moved through the space, her eyes sweeping over the subtle details that made up the environment, the polished edges of the desks, the reflective surfaces of glass panels, the patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the passing clouds outside. The soft hum of fluorescent lighting mixed with the distant, rhythmic sound of rain against the tall windows, creating an ambient soundtrack that underscored the quiet dignity of the moment. She paused briefly near the doorway, letting her gaze linger on the expanse of the room behind her, noting the relaxed lines of the officer's shoulders, the softened expressions, the silent acknowledgement of her composure, and the subtle recalibration of perception that had taken place in the space. Monique exhaled slowly, the motion deliberate, steadying, as though each breath reinforced the equilibrium she had established, the measured rhythm aligning perfectly with the gentle ambient noises of the building and the city beyond. The reflections in the glass and polished surfaces captured her movement in fragmented, glimmering patterns, each flicker of light emphasizing the composed control she exhibited without a single word or overt gesture. The hallway leading to the exit extended before her, lined with doors and panels, each one reflecting fragments of the ambient light, creating a subtle, almost cinematic trail that followed her steps. The soft tap of her boots against the lightly carpeted floor created a muted echo, harmonizing with the distant hum of electronic equipment, the faint rattle of rainwater draining from gutters outside, and the occasional distant traffic sound, forming a layered auditory map of awareness that Monique navigated instinctively. She adjusted her stride to maintain an even, measured pace, each movement fluid, deliberate, and controlled, her awareness encompassing every detail of the space, the angle of door handles, the subtle variations in carpet texture, the way light bounced off reflective surfaces, and the quiet presence of the officers behind her. Her posture remained impeccably upright, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, the quiet authority of her demeanor radiating outward and subtly shaping the perception of those in the room without a single verbal cue. The ambient light shifted gradually as clouds passed over the rain-reflecting city, casting changing shadows and subtle highlights that accentuated the contours of her jacket, her hair, and the deliberate precision of her movements. Monique's mind cataloged the ambient sounds, the distant city hum, the gentle drip of water from a leaky vent, the faint echo of her own steps, and the subtle shifting of light across surfaces, integrating each into an intuitive understanding of space and presence. She reached the final set of doors leading to the lobby, her hand resting lightly on the handle, feeling the cool metal under her fingertips, aware of every vibration, every texture, every nuance of the environment. She paused for a fraction of a second, inhaling the subtle scent of polished wood, paper, and the lingering moisture of rain, the combined sensory details grounding her in the moment. Monique opened the doors smoothly, stepping into the larger lobby where the reflective tiles captured the diffused city lights, scattering them across the space as she moved with measured elegance toward the exit. The officers remained still behind her, their expressions composed, restrained, reflecting the acknowledgement and respect cultivated in the previous moments, a silent understanding that her quiet authority and disciplined presence had reshaped the room entirely. The rain outside continued its soft percussion against the large glass windows, the distant sounds of the city blending with the ambient hum of lighting and ventilation to form a subtle symphony that framed her. Exit. Monique's final steps carried her toward the main entrance, each one deliberate, precise, and imbued with the calm confidence of someone who had navigated the environment with complete awareness, leaving the officers and the space itself aligned with the quiet, unspoken recognition of her capability, control, and integrity, the entire building seeming to exhale with her as she moved into the rain-soaked streets beyond. Every detail of the space and moment etched into memory, a perfect closure to the tension and affirmation of her presence.